right on one of the channels as well. Hi, everybody. Thanks for being part of our first live community call. We've done these in the past, and we're bringing them back as a way for the community to interact and ask questions and start their Althea journey. We're also introducing JR to the Althea team, and maybe you can share a little bit about who you are, and we can kick things off.
Sure. My name is JR. I'm based here in upstate New York. I've been working in wireless for 20 years. And at Althea, I work mainly on the sort of community side, business development, technical marketing, things like that. So, but yeah, mainly focused on community and helping people get started.
Yeah, wonderful. We're really excited to have you on board here and kick things off. And for folks that don't know me, I'm Deborah Sempier. I'm the co-founder of Althea and the CEO of a company called Hawk Networks that developed the IP behind what I am so passionate about, which is this the Althea protocol and what it empowers people to be able to build in new ways. I started actually as a background in net neutrality and sort of protecting the freedoms of the internet. And as a first and foremost nerd, built my own, backyard networks, ham radio operator, and early blockchain enthusiast in the 2011, 2012 days. And so have been through a lot of ups and downs in the blockchain ecosystem, but feel like there's so much exciting things about sort of combining the ability to have, multi-entity ownership. And might be good to kind of maybe kick off a bit with what does that even mean? So what is different about Althea? And JR, maybe if that's all right, I'll take us on a bit of a tangent on over there. Oh, you're muted, but I got the thumbs up there.
Yeah, go for it.
So I think there's the way the networks were built in the past, right? These kind of like legacy, we normally, when we get something like Comcast or Lumen or something like that, they have to build a fiber optic cable or, specific infrastructure to each carrier. And they build it and they capture you in sort of a rental model. This is per month, almost like if you were getting a subscription to this, right? And so that's really the only way they can capture you. So what happens then is it creates these artificial dead ends in networks. And, you see that when you look at the FCC maps, you'll see that, the green dot of the few houses that are connected. And right around that, there's always going to be an array of little red dots that say these houses are not connected. And in order to build to them, each individual carrier has to build bespoke hardware to each of those. And that's very inefficient. And this is because of the way the payments are made. And we actually, myself and my co-founder, Justin Kilpatrick, back in 2018, started looking at where the internet works right. And that is the internet exchanges where the carriers come together to pay each other for kind of peering and over the networks. And carriers don't charge each other rental. They charge each other these sorts of like peering agreements that are very open markets. And what happens there is, of course, bandwidth capacity has gone up year over year, and the cost of bandwidth has gone down. And so Althea is really the thesis that we can bring those kinds of same fundamentals all the way down to the end user, and that you can choose your choice of cost or latency at any given time. And that people can build things in more efficient ways, that we don't have to have dead ends in networks. And so really, we find the software stack finds its niche in about the 25% of the US that doesn't have access to the internet at home. Because they don't have access because they either don't have infrastructure or the payment just doesn't really work for them. And so, yeah.
So that's really helpful. So where are there are existing Althea networks out there operating today, connecting people? Where are they being used? Where have they been most successful? What are they being used for in terms of how are they being used in the community to connect folks?
Yeah, that's a great question. And just before I kind of get into that, if anyone has a question in any one of the platforms, please feel free to ask that. Jay and I will be trying to monitor for your questions. This is supposed to be really interactive. This is kind of one of the the first ones that we've done in a while. But if you don't get your question answered this time, feel free to put it in any one of the chat platforms and we'll reach out to you or we'll get it on the next one as well. So yeah, to your point, JR, we find that when anyone has a connectivity challenge, and if that's a rural place, we built a lot on the really challenging topologies where you need maybe an off-grid or there's really no connectivity at all. And those places are also economically challenging. So it's not that Comcast or Lumen or AT&T or something doesn't want to serve more people, but it's economically challenging for them to make that maybe a few thousand people out in the desert in Oregon make sense for them. But it's and this is where we say like the structure is broken. The Althea toolkit is really what fits there. We're live in about 10 networks in the US. And the other place that we fit really well is where people experiencing poverty are struggling to pay their bill, or they need to have a much more agile payment method. So we're working I'm actually here in Dallas right now, which is why I have such craft quality for the video. So I appreciate everybody bearing with me there. So Dallas and Atlanta, Las Cruces is a city of around 100,000. We're building a network there. And a lot of that is due to the fact that, again, the way the payments are treated is more like a utility where you have to give, your name and phone number, and you have to have good credit and maybe even like the blood of your firstborn or something like that. Whereas when you have a much more kind of flexible prepaid system, more people can participate. And we see this is really interesting. 72 million people in the US use prepaid phones. That's about a third of the population, and probably even higher if we take into account that some of the 300 and something million US citizens are children. But what happens with a prepaid phone is, what do? You have $30 in your pocket, you go to Walmart, you buy a phone, you buy some data, right? It's very easy. Anyone could do it. They don't ask you any questions. But when you get internet to your home, it's a much bigger thing. Do you have any debt? Do you have a bank account? It's monthly. Oh gosh, did you realize that you forgot to turn in your modem to your provider 10 years ago and now you owe $400? And for many Americans, that's really too much of a lift. The other place that we do see Althea networks is internationally as well. We've started some networks in Nigeria and Colombia, and we also have a network with a partner called Revabit in Ghana, who is looking to expand. They just put up a new tower, and excited to see their progress as well. So anywhere that you have a challenging connectivity or a problem, you can use the Althea toolkit to solve that.
Yeah, and just talking about those problems for a second, I mean, we're all fairly familiar with anyone, especially in the US, which is probably most of who's joining us today. But I noticed as someone who's not from here that you could be in the biggest city in the world, or one of the biggest, most important cities in the world, and you would have one choice of internet provision. When I was in Brooklyn, it was Optimum or Optimum, and now I'm out here in upstate New York, I get Spectrum or Spectrum. How has that happened? What are the problems that causes that people can solve with an Althea network?
Yeah, that's a big question. And it really comes down to a lot of these structural issues. And, I think maybe folks jump into this call and think, oh, we're going to talk about, building hardware and things like that. But it's really a lot of the design work that has led us to where we're at right now. And a lot of those same issues about the way we capture value from people that have led to monopolies. I was quite surprised to hear that mobile network operators usually spend between, over $1,000 in cost to acquire that customer. And if you're, the normal like monthly amount that you're getting from someone is, close to $35 or $40, that's quite a long ROI. And so really only the biggest companies can absorb those costs. It can also be things, regulatory difficulties and things like that too, that make things easier to build networks. But it's also, timing. I think that the rise of programmatic systems and has allowed more people, and I think that's really the promise of Althea that's so exciting to me, is now, maybe ever before, the lift to build an infrastructure network is not the same as it was. That people can participate, maybe as just the management layer. So Althea actually it's what they call an open access type of network, which means it decouples the service layer. Many people can be service providers if they'd like to, or can be one service provider. And the underlying infrastructure can be funded or owned separately. So that might look like a relay, maybe a library or a business owner in town might have some infrastructure, a tower or something, or an apartment owner might decide to put in some infrastructure in their apartment. And they get a little bit of that revenue share. And that doesn't happen because you have to send them a 1099 and, it's you have to have all of this sort of paperwork and send the bills. And as you can see, there's more and more friction that has compounded into the process. Whereas with Althea, all of that is programmatic. Simply become part of the network. You can manage the network separately as a separate entity. And I think, they always say, a lot of what makes success in a market is both the timing and the right tools for the job.
Yeah. I think one of the things that obviously we struggle with here is that, access to just deploying infrastructure. Sometimes you'll come into communities and, all those lovely poles that the city owns, someone might have exclusive rights to them. It gets I've never really come across the phrase regulatory capture until I came to the US. So there's all kinds of different challenges that mean that here people pay more for a worse quality of service than most other developed nations. But obviously, as you mentioned, in Africa, it's also being used to provide access to folks there who have never even had it before, where there's absolutely nothing, and you need to build something. And the Althea framework, you've used the term sort of broadband Legos before. That's a favorite. How technical do you need to be if you're thinking about, okay, I want to launch a network, I'm interested in doing something about the lack of choice in our community? What are the sort of key things to get going? What are the sort of top 3 considerations for folks taking their first steps? And how technical do they need to be? What sort of people need to be involved?
Yeah, that's a great question. And there's usually a couple of different roles that come into a network. And they usually kind of divide in either the outreach broadband champion, the social organizing part of it. Basically, like if you think about a property manager, right? Someone who is managing and supporting the network, doing the outreach in the community. And that person doesn't have to be technical. That the person's kind of goal is to integrate with the community. We always use the phrase of building with community instead of building for community. And there's such a sustainable difference when you build that way. And so really people that have skills and working in community organizing are going to find themselves really successful with that role. And then in terms of the infrastructure building, that is where more technical challenges, come into place. There's construction, there's insurance. I mean, this is, real infrastructure for communities. And I think it's important that it is, real infrastructure, that we're not just throwing up Wi-Fi access points or something like that. People rely on this. And so it has to be, and also safety comes into play too. You got people on ladders, building that kind of thing. I think it needs to be taken with the gravity that it deserves. However, this is where Hawk Networks, kind of the parent company behind Althea, and other companies like Hawk Networks, of course, will emerge. Missoula Broadband, they also do. They've helped a few other companies get off the ground, or cooperatives get off the ground too, with technical assistance. But this is a bit what we almost call a virtual network operator. So a lot of times we'll have a nonprofit that we'll work with that, isn't very technical, but has that community piece, that outreach piece, absolutely unlock. And I think that's just really such a beautiful partnership between the nonprofit or the government entity, or even an individual who's a broadband champion in their community, to work with an entity like Hawk Networks, who can do, we're going to be debuting something we call CATS, which is basically core as a service, but has that telecom so it's core as telecom service. It has that virtual network operator with the NOC, with the support, all of that behind that. It can help you with the ACP piece of that. And ACP is a federally run program that subsidizes ISPs with $30 a month per low-income family that they're connecting, or low-income household that they're connecting.
Yeah. So going back to the community part for a bit, because that's something we're all very hot on. You know, I've always appreciated the fact that something that is more community driven, whatever it might be, whether it be a internet service provision network or whatever, tends to keep more money in the community because it's being run and operated and owned by the folks who are there. How, there's different ways that everyone who's involved in making this happen can actually operate this for their community, whether they be on the social side, on the community side, or whether they be on the technical side. They could be installing equipment or just managing it. How does that work in terms of how people get paid, basically? Because they're putting in effort. They're able to get some reward, and that's actually built into the platform as well, right?
Yeah, exactly. And that's kind of, and people run, cooperative ISPs and things like that before, but really Althea just sort of makes the whole process very streamlined. So essentially, if you're an Althea broadband subscriber and you have a router in your home, someone's come to install that for you. Then you load it up with a debit card with your monthly payment, right? Maybe put $50 in there or something like that. And then as you select your choice of cost or latency, whether you prefer one or the other. And what's really great about Althea is it actually routes through the different, whether it's a wireless hop or different pieces of fiber, and then based on your preference of cost or latency, and then pays them incrementally. It also pays that network operator that daily fee. So those are the folks that are running the network, that installed your connection in there. And that's, also, like you said, helps keep that money local. And that just comes automatically, right? So there's no need for billing or anything like that. And of course, in the future, what's really great about that with the key LTE and LTE product, potentially that can also lead to growing the network beyond just broadband to also, smart cities or, smart and precision agriculture or whatever that might be. These networks start to look a little more holistic, and I think what we're also seeing from, mobile networks is a blending of public and private. Like, what does it mean to have a private network? Could other people roam on that? Could you have a network that roams between like the Amazon sidewalk or something like that, for example, and then a privately built network? And I think we're not quite there in terms of technology. There's things called like MOCN that allows cores to interoperate, and other technology stacks that need to get built. But right now, that's what's exciting, is that people can own infrastructure, people can pair to the service layer, and eventually these networks can start to integrate together.
Yeah, that is exciting. I mean, and funding came up there, so let's talk about that, because that's something that comes up if you listen to anyone who's talking about these things in the space right now. There's a lot of debate about how the let me just get this right, BEAD, which is broadband equity something from the federal government. There's $47 billion about to be handed out to build better internet access networks across the United States. What are the sort of opportunities there? What are some of the restrictions? Because it's one of those areas where it's like, you can't just use ubiquity 5 gig Wi-Fi. That's not going to get funded. I know that's one kind of restriction, that if it's not a licensed wireless technology, they don't count that as being a valid, the scheme doesn't count that as being a valid option. So what's happening in the realms of funding right now?
Ooh, another big question. You got these heavy hitting ones today. And yeah, in terms of BEAD and what you can see, kind of the way the government is looking is that they're really trying to build fiber assets, which also support wireless as well. And those states are going to be mandating how that's handing out to interested parties. So they also, like with the Rural Reconnect grants, they usually look for a provider that has a few years of financial history. And so these are, essentially construction grants to build, fiber optic. And so it can feel like pretty daunting, I think, to some smaller operators, and it may not be the best fit for everyone. But again, this is where potentially Hawk Networks can help facilitate, or that social aspect of partnering with. They're really looking for ideas where there's public-private partnerships, or there's someone who wants to come along and do the operation piece. Althea is an open access network where you have a service and then you have the infrastructure decoupled. But there are, I think, the other one that's pretty well known in the U.S. is Ammon, which is entry point. So it's kind of that same sort of thing. So it's exciting to see that those kinds of models are more well supported. And I think you could have a partnership, work with someone like Hawk to do that. The other kind of, I think, a really great fit for some of the smaller operators is more of the social impact funding, where they're really looking at how do we do this in a digital equity holistic way. That you're not just solving the infrastructure needs, which is really where BEAD is at, is constructing fiber, but you're also providing that community outreach. Maybe you got a device as well. Maybe you're really focusing on the lower income households, and there is like separate funding for that. And we've worked in the past with a really great social impact funder called Connect Humanity that's worked with one of our other partner networks, which is Wave 7. They've worked with us as well. We received some funding for Hawk Networks. And they're great. And I think that's also like if you're a smaller operator and you're looking at all the different funding sources, one of those that's often overlooked is this idea of going in and being, focusing not only on the impact of the infrastructure, but focusing on the impact of, digital equity.
Yeah. I mean, it was something of it. A lot of this funding came about because of what we went through over the last few years with COVID and everyone, disappearing off home to either study or work. And while, in general, if you had a connection, everything worked great. But from my experience when I was with Salona, we were doing some work there with certain education outfits across the country. And what they found is that in a lot of communities, there isn't a fixed internet connection. They don't have fixed cable coming into their house. Internet access is on the mobile phone. And, modern families are different. Kids are not necessarily in the same house 7 days a week. There's movement out there. What are there any areas where Althea is being used to sort of address that particular education issue where, kids are studying from home and improving their connectivity?
Yeah, and just to be clear, so Hawk Networks is the the kind of company and the behind Althea, and Althea is a bit of the platform. I sometimes describe it as Linux is like Althea. It's a universal platform that can be used in many different ways. Components are open source, and then there's Hawk Networks that is doing a lot of the system integration and support, very much like Red Hat does, right? It supports people being able to use the different protocols. And just a quick segue too, we are hosting the world's first IFI, or infrastructure finance hackathon, starting July 1st, which we will have some more information about shortly. But if you're interested if anyone sort of listening is interested in using the Althea platform or building on top of it, or you have some vision, it's a good place to get involved. And then there's some prizes and things like that too. But in terms of Hawk Networks, that's really where we have found our niche is supporting digital equity, either from the infrastructure perspective, like we talk about with rural and building rural networks, or working together with nonprofits who have, the mandated experience and understand. For example, when we were working in one of our networks, there was another provider that came in, bought everybody internet, but nobody was using it, right? So there's a couple hundred people that had devices and, ostensibly could be online, but they couldn't figure out why is no one using this? Why is there no traffic going through the network? Well, it turns out that, they had just assumed that people would understand that a WPA2 passkey was the same as a password. Well, they did not. It was not in, and then there wasn't in the language. There was a language barrier there. And then that also was just not explained. And it was a very kind of hard numbers, letters, whatever password. And so really sort of just tackling that little piece around understanding and education around that. And then also like getting the laptop, making sure someone can, use that, it's turned on, that kind of thing. All of those little tiny pieces are a part of that big piece of digital equity. And so we definitely have done that. We've worked with capacity building with tribal broadband and helped start the Tribal Resource Center and done some of the boot camps and things like that too.
Yeah. I mean, using it's the key, right? Like you can build it and they will come isn't really always going to answer all the questions. That's you've got to, you actually have to, be more involved than that. And I think that's one of the interesting enabling things with the Althea platform and what Hawk Networks do is that there's this a much deeper involvement in actually how people are going to use it. And I think that sort of takes me back to one of my other questions. We've talked about community a couple of times, but so in your area, you might be thinking, okay, well, I know from my experience that I only have one choice. It's really expensive. It's $70 a month. It's, there is no other option. So maybe, we could set something up. Who are the sort of most helpful community groups to start talking to? Because number one, you want to understand how it's affecting everybody, not just you. Right.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, what we found a lot of success is working with schools who very much have a heartbeat on the internet connectivity of their students.
Yeah.
And so working together with school districts, they're wonderful partners in the support of that. Also, your county usually has a good understanding of where infrastructure needs are. We've worked and actually that's a great point because we've worked with a few different either county level or kind of public entities on some of the BEAD preparedness. So right now there's also ahead of BEAD in the US, a lot of these what they call broadband action teams or community, readiness. There's usually state level broadband support. That's also a good place to get started. Understand what what kind of funding is coming up or where the opportunities are. Because I think the one sort of missing piece from all the mapping and all the other things is we don't necessarily know what's coming up, but they may have, your county may have a better idea, or the broadband action teams might have a better idea about what's going to be built and how your community organization can fit with that.
Yeah. We obviously spend a lot of time looking at broadband maps from various different states and things like that. We're kind of familiar. We just like, oh, what's happening in that state? Let's go find their broadband map if they have one. Like there's a pretty good one for New York, which I've been checking out recently. Covers my area down to the house level and what sort of service they can get. What are the sort of resources people can look at? What should they be searching for on Google or DuckDuckGo if you're being smart? What are the kind of things that they can look for to sort of find these resources? What are the helpful places to sort of look for these things?
I mean, I think, the first place to start is both the USDA maps and the FCC maps, right? Those are the two that are, depending, especially if you're rural, but they'll give you some demographic information, what's being reported as available in your area, who won the latest RDOF, in the USDA case, who won that. So that'll give you a lot of, almost too much information. But
how easy is the FCC information to access? Because I know there's been a big update in terms of data, and I was listening to a podcast, I can't remember which one it was, Broadband Bits maybe, but they were talking about the issue of how you actually get access to that detailed data and that it's not necessarily open. Is that true? What's the situation?
The problem with it still remains a problem with the FCC map. It's not necessarily, in my lens anyway, it's not necessarily access. It's just much of the mapping prior to, even with the BDC, you get a little bit more nuance to that data, but it's carrier reported data.
Right.
networks
Oh,
reports their
okay.
data as well. So, you're not necessarily, I mean, BDC was supposed to have, you're starting to get more of the like consumer data, but that's also super nuanced, right? So what's interesting is, if people are doing these sorts of surveys, you have a lot of also, where are they? Maybe they're, a billion feet away from the router, or maybe they're on an old, ancient machine. And, I think that we're really lacking a lot of like the maps will give you a sense, and they'll maybe give you a sense of who's operating in your area. But a lot of times, especially in the rural areas, the local smaller fixed wireless operators, or the smaller operators, won't report.
Right.
And you won't, you won't know.
They're busy running their network. It's okay.
Yeah. I mean, that's, I'm not here to criticize anyone over that, but I think the maps are a good place to start. But you get a much better sense of the need working with those community organizations where, again, you might, like the first example, you got everybody with internet, everyone has internet access, it's super fast, great. Don't have the Wi-Fi password, they don't have access.
Yeah.
So,
for sure. The I think it's my experience of looking at the various maps. Then the New York one's pretty good. It has household level sort of who services that location and whatever else. But like you say, it's reported by carriers, and I know from talking to my local guys here, they don't really know where the fiber ends. So there's hybrid fiber copper somewhere, but like the people who come here and service my router or service me if I have an issue, they're like, I honestly don't know, man. They don't know.
So I'm going to go on a bit of a tangent here, and we're going to go a little bit maybe toward blockchain land here, but that's such a huge problem. The infrastructure, I mean, across the board, we really don't, we may understand people have connectivity, whatever, but we don't really understand at like a public level where our infrastructure is and what health it's in. And, can you think about our transportation? Like we kind of know where our roads are, we know where they're at, and we, so this is one of the points of why we created something we call liquid infrastructure, that will basically allows that asset, that revenue that asset is producing, to be a tokenized thing on the blockchain. So you can track it, you can, and if I sell it to you, JR, then the revenue will come along with it. You don't have to trust me. I sell it to you, it's in your account, and you get that revenue already with that. So it does a couple different things. One, of course, it solves that transparency issue, which kind of is the elephant in the room. I mean, we're doing all of this mapping, but we're not actually mapping the fiber, are we? We're just mapping sort of connectivity. But if we have a system where it's essentially supply tracking / tracking where the, that revenue, which is telling us, okay, this is a fiber line, it's being used. But it also allows the owner of that telecom tower or that fiber to be able to buy and sell their assets more easily, or lend into fund. I mean, that's where I see where these community networks really start to scale, is if we have these, tokenized representations, and it's a lot easier for people to use them as collateral, to take out a loan, these kinds of things, and continue to fund and build networks, or perhaps do a good crowdfunding. It just gives a lot more composable options for funding these networks, which is your, kind of to your point earlier, where there's the BEAD, kind of tough to access for smaller operators. Big lift. There's social impact funding that can be the right thing, but there's kind of something in between. And so this is really kind of meeting builders with the capital necessary to build out.
Yeah, it's definitely going to be interesting to see how that is used, and we're interested to see the dApps that folks are going to build during this hackathon. P.S. Join Justin and myself on Monday at 12 EST to talk about the hackathon. Little plug there. So we've talked about engaging with the community to find out where the issues are. Very, very important. And actually, I was talking to one of the other folks from Althea the other day. Shout out to Ryan, and he was saying, he was talking to a potential area that's looking at a network, and one of the parties that was there was the school, organization, and they had all the data of all the kids and exactly not just whether they had internet or not, but how fast was their internet access and who was their provider. So again, I think, that's a really goes back to that, engage with your local community. There's a lot of institutional knowledge there and people want to help. Yeah, you might look at things and say, okay, well, things aren't working great. But that's not because people want them to be that way. There's a lot of goodwill out there. And if you're sort of looking to make things better, I think, you're generally going to find a lot of support out there. But yeah, talk to the people in the know, talk to the people who are actually dealing with these problems on a day-to-day basis and how it affects folks in the community. But yeah, I just thought it was really interesting that the local school organization just had all that information just bam, straight away. I mean, there's nothing more helpful than that, I don't think.
Yeah, I mean, I think since 2020 hit, that, was very much like top of mind. How do we understand, how students are going to interact with that? And I also think that it's a big part of how they look at the summertime for students as well, because you sort of, a lot of these, students who might be at risk, are they going to be able to have, access to communication when they're not in school, be able to get a meal or whatever that is. Right. So, I absolutely think you're right. School districts are definitely very much aware of where the problem areas are at and are on top of the problem.
So we've talked community, we've talked funding, we've talked maps. And in terms of, there might be some folks either watching this down the line or watching today who maybe aren't so technical. I know we've got some technical folks here. I see you, Russell and Mark. But if you're not, it can be pretty daunting to think about, oh, we're going to dig fiber in our streets and to go from, I think we should have better internet. And so I was like, we're going to, dig up the street.
It's interesting to me. Yeah, but the rest, I mean, this is a very US thought, right? Or maybe a very like Western thought, because the rest of the world, in a lot of places, fiber is considered to be less reliable than wireless because there's less regulation. And so a lot of people just going and throwing up fiber on poles and like cutting things as they need to. And it was really shocking to me to really realize I have this sort of US focus that, fiber is like really the most reliable and it's super hard. And, a lot of the rest of the world takes a couple of folks, gets some shovels, or like climbs up the pool and does the fiber. It's a piece of cable with glass. And if you've dug you're in your house, you're putting in your sprinkler system or something like that, like probably that's about as complicated. So I think one of the things is just sort of removing the barrier that like running fiber is a special subject. It's a piece of glass, a cable, you can bury it, you can put it on a pole. I mean, I guess certainly there's things mostly around safety, and, permitting and things like that could be kind of daunting. But like if you're an apartment owner and you have a small apartment, you have 8 units, you can run Ethernet cable or you could run fiber. It's, relatively simple. There's a lot of manufacturers, even Ubiquiti, that has a low cost, what they call GPON unit that sort of allows you to connect all the different fiber pieces together. And so I guess my first argument is like, I think part of the issue why it seems, so daunting is there's just sort of this barrier on capacity to really how we're thinking about it. It doesn't have to be in the purview of big monopolistic companies. It's only sort of there because, we're letting it be. Yeah.
I'm a great believer in starting small and growing, being organic as much as possible.
Absolutely.
Because I think, along that journey, you learn things along the way. If you just go, okay, well, we're going to blow 1,000 kilometers of fiber around our town and we're starting next week and we'll be done in 6 months. Okay, that's the build it and they will come kind of thing. But there's other ways to go, right? No.
Yeah, it doesn't work. Absolutely. And I think I think that's a good salient point. We usually ask when we have a new partner that wants to build a network, where are your first 25 homes that you're going to connect, right? What are you where are those first 25? And look at that. And then from there, you can make a larger plan. But oftentimes people like to say, I would like to serve the city of Minneapolis. The whole thing, huh? Yep,
Uh,
the whole thing. Well,
okay.
where's the first 25 people in Minneapolis you're going to serve? And then, go from there. And so I'm glad you brought that up, because I think that's one of those very human tendencies to
Yeah.
really sort of take this bite off this huge hamburger, right? Instead of just, try to put it all, eat it all at once.
Yeah, I mean, start by nibbling away at the edges. The one of the things that I've learned the last few months, as I've been getting to know more about, what Althea is doing, what Hawk Networks are doing, is that MTUs and MDUs, they're a great launching point. They seem to be a great place to start because you've got a lot of folks in a small space, easier to deploy maybe your cabling and all those kind of things. A stick-built 3-story apartment block is pretty easy to deploy infrastructure into. What's your sort of thoughts around MTU? So MTU is more business, multi-tenant unit, MDU, multi-dwelling unit. Sorry if I use too many acronyms.
There are lots of people live in a lot of people live in one building. Is what we're and that's So they're equally a blessing and a curse, is my opinion. They're, at least in the U.S., and I think it's structured different in other places in the world, but in the U.S., there's a lot of the incumbent carriers that have bespoke deals, and some of it is a little in the gray area of how legally they're supposed to operate, but oftentimes there is some sort of revenue share component to that, and
right.
So you can be coming into an area where an existing provider has that, has a contract with the MDU landlord. Property manager might be really supportive. And so that's a really hard industry to disrupt from that standpoint. But from the other standpoint, if you do have a good relationship with landlord and property manager, and they're welcoming, then it is people all in one area, right? And then you can often build something that's hardwired. Wireless is a little bit more in terms of like technical. That's what's interesting. Everything's fiber or cabling up a building is somewhat more technical, and it can require certain types of like low voltage licenses and things, but wireless tends to be a little more enigmatic. Like wireless has its own state of mind, and unless you really enjoy the unpredictability of life, sometimes cabling, and then you can really predict your ROI a little bit better, and you can look at how things can be more sustainable. So we're very much in favor of looking at an MDU as an option, and we find that a lot of times those communities that are somewhere in the 15,000 to a couple 100,000 area, where they're not quite rural, they're not quite big city, right? Those are really good places that may be a little bit more welcoming than starting off in a major metropolitan.
Does that count as a small-sized city or town, or does that count as a mid-sized city or town in America? My metrics are not that great.
I'm from a rural place, I have about 1,000 people, so I don't know. I think that they have this term that refers to these like football towns. So if there's a major league, and I have to apologize, I am not a sports person.
Well, not football.
Somewhere out there, someone who is very involved in sports is cringing at this conversation right now. But I think that if the city is large enough to have a major like football league or whatever, or football team, then that's probably a little bit more. You're gonna find the larger carriers there. That's where the cable companies and might be there as well too. But that said, there's usually quite a large population of folks that, like we were talking about earlier, need more of that flexible payment structure, and it's definitely about 25% of the population that is your addressable market.
Right. You're offering choice. It's not. The issue right now is that there's zero choice. It's whoever has a cable outside your house, unless you're in sort of Verizon or T-Mobile's fixed wireless access area, and those things have been incredibly successful. They've been
I
think a lot of growth because people want to take that router, their internet access, wherever they go, not just be stuck, just in one address. But all kinds of reasons why they've been successful, but it's been successful because there's literally no option in most places.
Yeah, we
and
have
how can you
a guest
triple them?
here, Ricky, who's talking about where he's living in Arizona and similar type of thing, right? It's a wireless network, maybe kind of an only choice, and you know, keeping those prices high and those speeds low
Oh yeah, yeah,
instead of the other
absolutely.
way
I mean,
around.
yeah, I mean that's the other thing that right. The talk now is that they've had such explosive growth that they're now in a situation where they might be having overloaded towers again. So they
Yeah, it's very, and that's the thing too. I mean, it was early Starlink was the same way too. I mean, it's certainly when you have a network of 5 people. I mean, yeah, the performance of that network is going to be great. I can build anything. I can build
yeah
any technology. If you have very low usage, is going to work pretty darn good. But it's really when you start getting crowded areas and things like that. Not to say that these aren't viable solutions, but I mean, I certainly think that those challenges of scaling are present no one technology solution in terms of hardware, whether that's a new kind of LEO, which is a low Earth orbit satellite like Starlink, or that's T-Mobile and Verizon's fixed wireless, or a piece of fiber. None of all of these are going to have issues as things scale. And interestingly enough, in my community in Oregon, we have a fiber network, but I'm not an Althea one, but there's another fiber network who's having a lot of issues as a lot of that fiber hardware was deployed 10 years ago, starting to have issues
right.
with scaling along with switches and or breaks and things like that. So the health of that fiber itself also comes into play. And so there's and I think that's what's so great about Althea is like whatever technology that you need to deliver to your network, you can do. It's not just LTE 5G. It's not just fiber. It's the underlying protocol is adaptable and self-healing, no matter if you've got fiber on it or you're doing LTE 5G, and that's where we developed the key LTE core, or you're doing fixed wireless. It's all going to work.
Yeah, and something like the key LTE core would enable you to replicate the kind of service that folks like T-Mobile and Verizon have created, right? Where it's a 4G or 5G router in the home, and that's how their internet is coming in. And that is possible through private cellular, basically CBRS in the US, but that's expanding around the world now. We're starting to see. So Canada recently, I think in the last couple of weeks, announced 80 megahertz or 85 megahertz of spectrum for
nice chunk.
private. Yeah, big chunk.
Chunk.
That and they specified in the release that this is to be used for private networks, for industry, and they specifically mentioned underconnected communities, rural areas, First Nations, all those places where perhaps they've been ignored by the traditional market because not enough density, doesn't make commercial sense, whatever it is, but they specifically put that in there. That's Canada. We're also seeing a lot of spectrum being released across Europe. And all of these things give you the opportunity to do something which is really challenging before. I mean, I've done a lot of outdoor wireless over the years, and line of sight is always, I love trees, but I also hate trees. And, it can be a problem. But with cellular, we're getting the ability to all of a sudden have a reliable near or non-line of sight technology that can be used in these networks. How has that changed from sort of being, okay, we can do fiber, we can do a card wire, or we can do a ubiquity like 5 gig? What is the difference that's made by something like being able to deploy cellular technology in your network?
Well, I want to caveat by saying it's pretty early, just not for Althea, but just in general. I mean, the CBRS network's been out for a couple of years. Some of the challenges with that, and that frequency is a little higher frequency. It doesn't go through trees as well as some people would like it to. So, where we're at now is just sort of opening that up. Like I said, Canada just opened up that spectrum. It's a great sort of set of tooling. But what the future really is as having an eSIM or a flexible SIM card that sort of roams between your Wi-Fi network, a private LTE network that's set up as a fixed wireless network in your community, and then the public one, AT&T, Verizon, T-Mobile. that really is what gets exciting, right? So that same network that you're maybe setting up as a private LTE network for smart and autonomous farming vehicles and that kind of thing, right? That you set up at your farm to build as a private network that then, folks driving along the roadside can utilize. You get paid a little bit for that data. And then those same folks connect to that network. And then when they drive away from the farm, they're connecting to a public network of Verizon and AT&T. And that's, kind of talk to what I was saying about earlier, the core side of it is really that when devices can openly roam between different networks, both private and public, that's really exciting. But it's still, even now, it does let you have a lot of more flexibility in building a holistic network. And that's where you can take some of these more smaller rural areas where the sustainability piece is in question, right? How are you going to pay for the operating costs and upkeep and things like that? Well, now you can build a private network to maybe you have a rock quarry nearby, right? And all those, there's no cellular coverage at the rock quarry. Well, pretty soon that's all going to be autonomous, and then the cameras connected. Yeah. Well, your network can build that private LTE network that also is maybe part of your broadband network. And that helps you get an additional sort of revenue stream coming in and keep that network sustainable. But yeah, every small town is going to have agriculture, you're going to have industry of some sort that's going to also need, SIM connected LTE 5G. And I think that's so fixed wireless operators that have been running, point to multi-point antennas need to evolve, and it probably looks like a little bit of mix of fiber, a little bit of a mix of doing these enterprise and private 4G 5G networks that then are part of holistic connectivity. Because why don't we just talk about broadband? It's not like the needs of a community, are cell connectivity, their IoT, it's enterprise, it's all of these things in one. And that's when we talk about solving the digital divide, I see that, it should be this whole picture of all of those things, not just broadband and we're done, because that's not the entirety of the answer.
Yeah, I think that, the potential for working with businesses in the local area is quite exciting, because one of the things you can do in an Althea powered infrastructure is, let's just say that quarry is probably on top of a mountain, or they're digging down inside the mountain, but they're on a mountain. They can be a node. They can be providing service for their trucks, whatever it is that they're, I saw a video the other day of someone operating a quarry truck remotely from a chair with screens.
And but you have to have connectivity to do that.
Yeah, you needed private 5G to be able to do that. Now, you could deploy that on your own, and that's just yours, and you run it, whatever else. But if you're also providing some access to the community, you're not just spending money, you're also earning at the same time. And you don't have to do anything. The money just arrives in your wallet, right? That's how it works if you're a node.
Yeah, exactly right. That's exactly the point, is that, we're early on this, but that's the future of all of this. And, we're looking for folks that are, have those connectivity needs, that want to solve these problems with us. And whether it is for that quarry or you have a community network or anything like that, this is the time now, and get in early and get that, foundation set and be part of that future of connectivity. Yeah.
By the way, 5G will be coming on Althea, KLT cats. But, like the rest of the industry, we have to wait for the 5G radios to become commercially sensible and available in price. It's still, as Deborah said, it's still pretty early. And I spent the last 3 years talking to business about private cellular, and there's no doubt that there's an awful lot of use cases there. If you've got whatever, like you say, every community has something. Like here in the middle of nowhere in upstate New York, we've got actually quite a busy chemicals factory a couple of miles away. And guess what? They've got height. They've got infrastructure that you can put things on. Yeah. And they also just happen to be on net with Crown Castle already. On net means they're already connected to fiber. Crown Castle is one of the sort of middle mile infrastructure providers in the US. And that's another thing, you can go out and you can look I've done some research here over the last couple of weeks, because I learned by doing. And Crown Castle's map is actually pretty good. You can see, they've got a pretty up-to-date fiber map now and towers map. And it wasn't as expensive as I thought it would be to get on a tower. There's a 120-foot tower right in the middle of our town. It actually services primarily the railway infrastructure. It's radio comms on the MTA. But it was, I think, less than $500 per month for 5 feet of space on that tower, and they didn't care how high you were. Which that's not bad. Yeah, and that company has towers all over the US, primarily in the East, but they've got capacity everywhere. So I think one of the things I would say to folks is, don't be afraid of phoning up. The local, a lot of states will have a local fiber provider as well. Maybe not a national. They're more local, and they're probably doing a lot of the work to connect your local sort of infrastructure in terms of community, your schools, your county offices, all those kind of things. Look for those folks. They're really helpful. I spoke to First Light Fiber up here in New York, and they're like, great, yeah, we'll just sign this NDA. We'll send you a list of where our existing on-net buildings already are. Yep. I mean, all those things just help a great deal, but you can't substitute the getting into and talking to the other folks in your community and looking at that. I love technology, so that's my first thing. But this has been great. We're coming towards the end. Is there anything else you'd like folks to take away from today? Anything we haven't covered?
Well, I think that you ended on a great note. JR is really talking about, hey, it can seem daunting, but you'd be surprised that it is actually pretty accessible. The cost can be pretty affordable, and I think what I'd like folks to know is that we're here to support your efforts and support that integration of Althea and whatever that looks like for your community. So, love for folks to reach out at hello@althea.net or find us on Discord. Share your vision for Althea. Love to help make that come to fruition. Reach out. Of course, we're on Twitter as well. And if you're joining us from LinkedIn Live, we're also there. But yes, or any kind of smoke signals or anything like that, we should be able to find you in the universe there.
Yeah, I mean, another plug for the Discord there. You can find invites to the Althea Discord in all kinds of places.
We'll probably hold the next one on Discord. This is a StreamYard platform, and so then it'll stream to the LinkedIn Live and Twitter from there the next time we hold this as well. We have multiple folks there. Please jump in there, start the dialogue. If you're stuck anywhere, we're happy to help. Answer questions. On the Hawk Networks team, we got folks like JR, but also fiber infrastructure experts, folks that can help you get backhaul and everything else you need in between point A and shovel in the dirt on your new network. So thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks everyone. We really appreciate everyone who's come to this first call. So we'll probably wrap up now, but join us again in 2 weeks. The call will be on Discord, but we will share it to other places, as Deborah said. And jump in the Discord anytime, ask all kinds of questions, because folks who are already building and running networks in their community are there too. In addition to all the Althea folks, there's a community of over, I think, 800 or something, 800, 1,000 maybe folks on there. So, come in, say hi, ask some questions. There are no stupid questions.
All right. Well, we'll look forward to seeing everybody there. And thanks so much for joining us today, and happy weekend.
Thanks, everyone.